No Miki Show. We clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.
Hello and welcome to the No Miki Show. We are doing these extended interviews at this time this week, and I'm really excited because we're digging into a lot of books. You know, you don't have a lot of time to really examine. I mean, there's so much news in the world that we haven't had as much of an opportunity to examine a lot of the new books that are out, and I'm excited to be doing this for the next couple of weeks, is really digging deep because folks want it, and we're going to do it. Our next guests are the authors of Event Horizon, just got my copy, Sexuality, Politics, Online Culture, and the Limits of Capitalism, Bonni Rambatan and Jacob Johanssen. So much in this book, and it's not even that big. First off, for a dummy like me, thank you. All right, so I'm just going to go around. Feel free to talk over yourself. Sometimes it's hard over Zoom and different doing things virtually. I guess my big question is, how did you imagine putting all these ideas together? Because you cover a lot here, and it's sort of a lead up, like how the memes, for instance, the cuteness of the internet. Is this really just, I guess, a pipeline, like how the pipeline works on the internet into radicalization and anti-capitalism?
Jacob, do you want to take that?
I think how we sort of got sort of into writing this book, and I think you're right. So the book is kind of, it's bringing lots of kind of stuff together. It's also kind of maybe bringing things together that might not appear to be, necessarily sort of connected, but we really also kind of wanted to join the dots, with this book, sort of taking the internet, as it currently is. We can probably all agree on that we are in a very sort of, messy internet, or that the internet is a bit of a mess. And we wanted to kind of take that, as a starting point to kind of think about how did we get to this, we think very, very bad internet. How can we make sense of that? How can we actually, kind of analyze the internet with a view towards, kind of maybe alternatives, or, what the left can do, and also how is the left a little bit part of the problem at times as well, that we're sort of seeing, unfolding on social media and things like that, with various kind of things like harassment and so on. And for us, how to kind of approach this mess, how to untangle this mess, one way of doing that for us was through psychoanalysis, and we probably will talk about that more, as we go along. But that as a sort of way in to things, yeah.
Bonni, how did you get started on this? I mean, what point did you start to realize something was occurring that was a little bit more nefarious than, say, just your everyday cute meme?
Well, I've dabbled in like online cultural studies and cybercultural studies for a while. In fact, that was how Jacob and I got to know each other. Mm-hmm. So I've always been interested in like how, especially because I learned psychoanalysis and stuff like that, and it's all about linguistics, right? Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that there's this whole online culture. It's all about the symbols and the language and the communication networks and how that evolves, right? So the way that I see this is that obviously nothing is separate from the dynamics of that we can analyze in psychoanalysis, right? So that's why when we think of like selfies and cuteness and stuff like that, then there's always something there. There's always something beneath beneath the surface that's going on, right? So that was how that we actually got to writing this book. And there isn't exactly a point that I kind of suspected that there's something wrong, but it's just that when I've learned about online culture from the beginning, there's always this sense of, jouissance in Lacanian terms, right? There's this whole, for example, self-righteousness from both the left and the right in the meme cultures and stuff like that. So that was how we kind of set about doing this book.
And then also, sorry,
no, go
and
ahead,
also
go ahead.
maybe kind of as a probably as a sort of key moment that kind of was probably played sort of huge part in turning the internet and social media in particular right wing, was sort of 2015, 2016, Trump meme wars and kind of Gamergate, harassment campaigns, and all that sort of stuff has left such a lasting kind of impression, has left such a bitter taste, and has shaped online culture to such a degree. If we were to pinpoint, it's difficult to kind of pinpoint the sort of starting point, but I think that would be one, where we would kind of say, okay, what happened there, and how can we sort of understand, the role of memes now, the role of kind of online politics, and how it's also kind of all related to sex, right? In psychoanalysis, it's a bit of a cliche, everything is about sex, but we kind of sort of unpack that in the book as well. In a way that's true, and it's particularly true when it comes to the internet today.
So, okay, we touch on these things a lot on the show. So I'm like almost like, where do we start? How do we dig into this? Because it is such a big topic. But let's just start with Gamergate. I think that's a good starting point for a lot of folks. First off, can you remind people who may not have been aware, weren't gamers, weren't involved in it, what Gamergate was?
So Gamergate essentially sort of was a harassment campaign that started out, or has its sort of origins on 4chan and on Reddit, so kind of quite notorious communities in themselves, or kind of platforms in themselves. At least certain parts of 4chan, certain parts of Reddit, quite notorious for racism, fascism, misogyny, all sorts of kind of abusive behavior and so on. And Gamergate sort of came about because a man who used to be a boyfriend of a video game critic, and then that relationship kind of broke down. He wrote a very kind of abusive sort of document about that person, and that was published online, and then it was sort of circulated all over the place, and gamers, the gaming community, at least that part of it, men, sort of took that on and sort of developed that into a harassment campaign of specifically video game designers, video game journalists, many of whom identifying as women, many of whom also people of color or queer people and so on, because they felt that the traditional sort of white male domain of video games is being now undermined, their turf sort of being invaded, and then this led to kind of harassment campaigns, of lots of people on Twitter, for example, and kind of sort of getting ridiculous sort of memes and hashtags trending on Twitter and stuff like that, while they were always sort of pretending that this was about kind of having a conversation about sort of video games journalism and ethics and stuff like that, which it never was. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of simplifying here a little bit, but that was Gamergate, and it really left a kind of it left a sort of lasting impression, I think, on the internet, on online culture, and social media in particular.
Well, I think what's interesting about this, Bonni, is you can see this pattern. Whether you're looking on the right or I'm a woman on the internet, I face this a lot. I know my colleagues, we've been in memes. Anybody who challenges, I'll just throw out an example. I've been one of the folks for a couple of years now challenging Joe Rogan. And every time I do that, it's like, goes back to, well, it's just, we should have free speech. Just exactly what you said. This is about fairness and he should have a platform and you're for censorship and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it's not actually, he's being rewarded with a platform. But then suddenly the memes come out and all of the other female hosts, which there aren't many in the political space, get put into memes like we're the mean girls or whatever. And I don't know who these people, I don't know if some of them are real that are putting this out there. There might be a few that are real, and there might be a lot that are bots or paid to do this. Is this sort of like a business model now to protect certain folks on the right and to quiet and silence, dissenting voices? I'll start with, women in this case. Is there a sense of that, Bonni?
Not deliberately as a business model. But obviously, when we talk about capitalism, then of course, it really benefits on how to exploit these kinds of antagonisms, right? The business model in and of itself is seemingly innocuous, right? It's just like, it's very innocent. It's just they just want engagement. They just want like the largest share of the market, and just follow where the market is and what the market wants and how it behaves. But the market behaves in ways that are perpetuating and sharpening these kinds of antagonisms, and that's why things go south in many ways, right? So we talk about the reification of and the valorization of antagonism in this book, right? And that's, I mean, the more you discourse online, the more the platforms are winning, the more the platforms are benefiting. And a lot of the time we don't exactly realize that. We feel a lot of us, both the left and the right, but mostly the left, right? Because the right tend to troll a lot more, but the left tend to want to explain and just discourse and just these things. But then it's just the sense of heroism after you win a flame war. That's where does that lead, and what kind of benefits, what kind of changes does that go? And what we want to analyze here is that what are the kinds of desires that are at play here, right? And where do they come from? Who designed these things, right? And how much do these algorithms and the platforms affect our own desires and our own sense of fighting for liberation? But is it really,
Right.
is it like how do we make sense of all of this, and how do we become critical in our own fights, in our own discourses, in our own conduct online?
So let's touch on some of the sexuality stuff. I know we're jumping all over, but there's a lot. Well, actually, before we get to that, because there's the narcissism and the gamification aspect, and I think that's a good dovetail into the sexuality, because I mean there's no doubt, right? So if you're a woman, let's say, or you identify as a woman, and you're on the apps and you're on the internet, what kind of content are you likely to see versus a traditional, their target audience, the white male?
Definitely, and also, a lot of things, especially for me personally, the sharpest difference, the most palpable difference, is when I accidentally log out of social media, and it just then the app has no information except where I, and it's just that they just assume they just feed content to my feed, push content to my feed based on what people in Jakarta, for example, usually consume. And then a lot of it, sadly, it gets worse if I go back to my hometown, which is like a smaller city from this one, and then a lot of it just becomes all of these conspiratorial thinking, and just all of these fake news and all of these things, right?
Mm.
Yeah, but getting back to your question, definitely the kinds of content that we see is really dependent on what the algorithm thinks about us. And then the thing that you mentioned about narcissism is essentially, of course, we enjoy. It's not necessarily pathological when we like looking good online, obviously. But the thing is that there's also not just looking good, but there's this fantasy that those online selves actually represent us, and it's not our personal fantasy. We know that it's different from our quote unquote real life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then those are the images that are there to represent us, and those are the fantasies underlying the Silicon Valley ideology and all of these tech startups everywhere, is that we are fully our data. We are nothing more than what they can gather from us, and which is, the fantasy is that the more data you can gather, then the closer you get to the truth, right? And as philosophers, as critical
Right.
theorists, we need to really ask, what do you mean when you say that you are getting closer to the truth? And who gets to say that, and why do you say that it can be reduced to just data online, right? And there we get to all of these interesting dynamics between the kinds of perversion, which is like, I know that's not me, but and I know that people are mining my data, but nonetheless I do it anyway, because it's like, on the one hand, it's just it's what we're used to. It's how we socialize these days, but also on the other hand, it's pleasurable in a way, because we get the likes, we get the attention, we get the retweets, we get the follows. So there's this switch in our mind, which is like, because in the past, when we talk about the Lacanian big other, for example, like the kind of imaginary universe where we to whom that we present our ourselves, right, our true selves. Now
Right.
that's very real in social media, because people get to acknowledge us. People actually get to comment on our posts. People actually get to like our selfies, right? So there's that specific enjoyment in the midst of the worry in how our data is being used and how our privacy is being infringed upon, and all these things.
But there's a projection. So we as humans, as individuals, obviously want to project something into this digital landscape, a version of who we want to be or appear to be. And then there's also the projection of the folks who want to contain that. So if you're, it's one thing to be taking selfies and be a teenage girl and seeing other teenage girls and trying to. It's another thing if you're, wanting to engage in political discourse as an opinionated woman, and then what kind of projection are you going to get back to you from the folks who are there to control that discourse versus, so that's why I asked, like, what kind of experience does a 17-year-old woman girl have compared to a 17-year-old boy online, and what they're generally receiving?
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, personally, I can't really speak about the 17-year-old girls versus boys, but personally it's just like me being trans online on Twitter. Obviously that's just really there are the kinds of people who do not take anything I say seriously just because I'm trans, and just because I post selfies, they think that my thoughts don't matter because like I'm shallow, because I like posting selfies online, and then on the other, because there's also this section in our book. I'm jumping a bit all over the place here, but there's this section in our book analyzing selfies, which is basically "Father, can you see I'm selfie?" which is a play on the Freudian dream. Father, can you see I'm burning? What we want to say there is essentially posting selfies is a plea for recognition, right? It's also a we want others to recognize the vulnerability behind posting a selfie. That's especially true for trans people and for people of marginalized identities, right? But then again, based on my personal experience, obviously those invite chasers, trans chasers who get into my DMs with like unsolicited sexual messages,
Oh my
because
God.
they only see the surface and just assume that I am that kind of object, and just this quality to that object. Just I'm jumping all over the place, but hopefully that kind of answers the.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is more from the consumer perspective, meaning like because they go into spirals, right? So if there's this Gamergate community and it becomes a community itself, or if young girls are only seeing like body image, which is great, and see, but also if they're not seeing political content, if they're not seeing other content out there, and men are only seeing, I'm using gender, being very gender specific because I feel like that's kind of how they're designing this. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, and I mean, we would kind of sort of look at that. We could look at that through things like the filter bubble, or
right.
the echo chamber and things like that, where of course networks by default are sort of built around kind of clustering things together. That's how kind of networks often function. That's certainly how social media functions. It clusters kind of groups together in the hope that kind of like-minded people or like-minded communities or groups will kind of form, because that's what people want to do. That's a very kind of human thing to maybe to wish for or to desire. It's kind of built, the internet or social media kind of built on this kind of friendship model, and on I have friends based on we have the same interests or whatever. That's how relationships form, and that is kind of reproduced on the internet. But then, as you say, whether that's always necessarily a good development in terms of having political debate, or kind of seeing other content, that's a very good question. On the other hand, of course, sort of what we also see, I mean, we've spoken about it just now, is then instances of harassment and abuse where echo chambers are actually deliberately kind of torn down, because you get people sort of invading each other's, or kind of going into each other's sort of territory as well. Right. So I think we kind of see both in a way, and of course that then makes kind of politics very messy or very difficult to kind of think about, or to think about ways of resisting that.
It's interesting because I think about, you started off by saying this all began around 2015 with Gamergate and Trump running for office, and so the internet is supposed to, the more data you'd think would be, the more you'd have more complicated and dynamic expressions of who an individual is, sort of on an individual basis, like a mosaic, rather than you that place. If you go there, you're going to get harassment and attacks and memes, and you better go back to where you're set up to be, because that's how the algorithm was built. To say it in a very raw way, I feel like that's kind of what we've come to. And if you want to venture into, if I as a 38-year-old woman wants to venture into YouTube political hosting, I better come up with some clever tactics to spill over into that pipeline and have some great allies. Otherwise, I'm not going to do well. And the reality is, it's very tough. You can't just burst in, and there's a lot of harassment that comes with it simultaneously. If you're not deemed for that, but I guess what I don't understand is this just a reflection of how the algorithms were built? Or is there sort of and maybe both, someone like a Steve Bannon or Cambridge Analytica, are those folks really speeding it up by, putting some extra juice in it to further their political goals?
Yeah, maybe it's both. So we also kind of need to think about that. Silicon Valley is also very, it may appear very liberal on the surface, but then it's, we know it's very, very kind of penetrated by, right-wing ideas and so on. So that's all, documented and stuff like that. So those two kind of factors are probably interrelated, and at the same time, of course, platforms would always describe themselves as sort of apolitical, and so on. But then how platforms are built is that they value, particularly kind of emotional content, kind of content that's sort of designed to kind of arouse various feelings and responses, because presumably that will get engagement going, that will sort of get people fired up and commenting or whatever, because that then means that there are users there. If those platforms don't have any users, they can shut down.
Go ahead.
I think there's this kind of belief or excuse that they like to make, which is like, this is just data, this is just business, this is just technology, and algorithms. Like, how we're not political, but I mean, obviously that is, right? I mean, who structures these kinds of power relations, and who owns the data and stuff like that, and where does your capital come from, and how are you traded, and as Jacob mentioned, the connections behind the ones who actually have the money in Silicon Valley and stuff like that. So some people, obviously, like Cambridge Analytica and stuff like that, they have an explicit political goal, and gathering 5,000 data points and so on. But then there are cases like that. But even if there are not those kinds of explicit political goals, it's always already political by the very nature of how these data are mined and are structured, right? By who gets to design the algorithms, and for whom, and who gets access to these technologies, who gets to own the data and use them, and to what end. That's already a political question.
And at the same time, I mean, we don't want to appear, too kind of sort of pessimistic or too kind of deterministic.
I think there's a moment to be so. I think it's understandable, this moment.
That's partly why Gamergate happened, or why, all this kind of horrible stuff is happening, is because, the internet has become a lot more kind of diversified, and things have changed, partly because of kind of those platforms, because of social media sort of is now so mainstream, that has also enabled something like your show, and stuff like that, and other voices being heard, and being able to support each other, and moments of solidarity and so on. That's all possible as well, just to kind of to sort of highlight that or emphasize that. Yeah.
But it's tough. It's not the old days anymore. Anyways, really, really interesting conversation. Would love to have you guys back on. I feel like there's a lot of moments where we could, move into the depths of your work.
Because we haven't even talked about sex yet. Yeah.
Yes, we haven't. So let's move on. See? All right. On the next interview, we'll dig into sex. But that's a great teaser. You kind of I think it's a great reason for people to buy your book, because you haven't even talked about the sex part yet. And that's, obviously what sells. Thank you so much for joining us. Event Horizon, Sexuality, Politics, Online Culture, and the Limits of Capitalism. Bonni Rambatan and Jacob Johanssen. Really, really appreciate you joining us today. And
Thank you.
good luck with the sales. It's been out for, about 2 weeks. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
will follow up with all these shout outs that we miss over the break. I will make sure to give everyone the love when I get back. As you know, I'm going on a little break, but we have lots of exclusive content coming out while I'm gone. And I'm very excited to report back to you when I do come back, all about, what I've done over my little break. In the meantime, if you aren't already, join us on patreon.com/The Nomi Key Show and become a patron. That's how we do this. We may not always get along, but it's really important to support independent media. I know on my part, I really like to support voices that are marginalized, a lot of voices that are fighting the algorithms. Sometimes I like to hear people who challenge my perspective. I just subscribe to someone who I don't always agree with, but I was like, you know what? This one take that they had really opened my mind up on a lot of things. That's how I look at it, because that's my way of fighting the algorithm. The algorithm is going to feed you what you want to hear. I started listening to something about Ukraine yesterday, and then halfway through the podcast, I was like, oh my God, this is like insane propaganda from Steve Bannon, literally. But it was shaped through comedy. I fell for it. So I paused and I, went down my own little rabbit hole and tried to seek things out. So to all of you who do listen to the show and enjoy it, please share it with your friends. That's how we get the word out. And of course, if you've been a patron, we are so grateful to you. And if you can't afford or aren't able to be a patron for a bit, please email us at thenomikeyshow@gmail.com and we will work something out. All right, welcome back to the Nomi Key Show. I can't believe we haven't done this yet. I don't know what's taken us so long. I mean, I imagine he's been very busy. It's been a crazy couple of years with the pandemic. Very excited to have Dr. Eric Osgood on. He is an internist, a medical director at Mission Hospitalists, and works with COVID long haulers as a physician, covidlonghaulers.com. Very excited to have you, doctor. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I feel like when you meet your internet friends, you're like, oh, but you're still meeting virtually. It's a very bizarre
and
situation.
By the way, our mutual friend Napoleon the Legend got a great opening song there. That's
right.
Yeah.
Very, very, very lucky to have his work. He offered it to us, and I was like, wow, this is like having someone do a mural of you or something. I had like a commissioned painting. It's more like the commissioned theme music for TNS.
That's right.
So I want to start off. I want to get into long haul COVID, but first, right before we taped here, and we're doing a pre-tape, so forgive me, folks. I was watching the CDC, Dr. Fauci and the CDC director talk about just sort of the state of COVID, and I feel like they're getting into the territory of explaining math and probability to Americans who either are exhausted, tune it out, don't want to hear math class, are confused, obviously resistant, and just like it's beyond their ability. And there's like a simplicity that I think there's a lot of anger from folks because they just want simplicity. They just want to know what's the right thing to do and what's not the right thing to do. And it changes over time. So right now, in New York State, Governor Kathy Hochul has removed mask ordinances, and in Washington, D.C., they were like, you know what, we're going to one-up you. We're removing mask ordinances and vaccines. You don't have to be vaccinated now to go into building. I feel like I kind of get the mask thing if so many folks have had Omicron and there's more ordinance for mandates for vaccines in different employers. But the vaccine one, like, what do you think? I know the CDC's already pushed back, but is this just politics and business, or because of course the leftist is like, oh, it's just because they want to make money. But I can't at this stage. I can't think that Kathy Hochul in particular, like, she's not one of those. She's not perfect, but she's not Ron DeSantis.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a combination of definitely politics, definitely a rush to get back to a semblance of, quote, normalcy, whatever that means, because you got elections coming up. You want people to be happy, and you want people are happy when things go back to the way things were before. So I think that's a component. And also, and this really segues into our long haul discussion, policy really seems to track with hospitalization death. As from what I could tell, as far as community transmission, it's always known that death and hospitalization are lagging indicators, but it doesn't seem that policy is sufficiently centered around the probability and the epidemiology of long COVID, which can be disabling. And this is what I worry about, is that we are calling a lot of cases mild because people either are subclinical or maybe they're just kind of mildly ill, similar to flu, but so many are ending up with this post-COVID syndrome, which can be very debilitating. And I'm a little concerned that that is not factoring in sufficiently to policy.
So, well, I guess before we even get into policy, like, now the administration is not reporting every hospital. But what the heck? Why?
It's I think there's the CDC and then there's DHHS who have methodologies of tracking. So the way they're spinning it as well, it's not that we're not following it. It's just one of the sort of avenues whereby hospitals are required to report. They kind of turn that off. I think it's a little bit of gamesmanship, because you are going to get a little bit of a rosier picture when you do it that way. So it's a little bit of both. It's like a little bit hyperbolic to say they're not counting it anymore. They're stopping track, but it's also a little bit Weasley to say, oh no, it's no big deal. We're just changing it the way the methodology, the DHHS and the hospital systems and the requirements of reporting being shut off is going to impact the way that numbers appear, and it is certainly paint a rosier picture than we would otherwise see. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle.
Okay, I'm going to get to how long I promise. But
okay, talk about whatever you want to talk about.
You're just so smart. So I have all these questions, and usually I just go on shows and we're all talking about COVID like we're experts. I'm like, this is not good. We shouldn't be doing this at all. So
no, you guys have been good. You, Majority Report, you guys really. I've been watching you guys since the first. In fact, having you guys to watch has been good. It's been an escape. I always enjoy turning you guys on and tuning in, and you guys have been doing a really good job of being cautious with what you've been saying and relying on experts and not making statements that are untoward in terms of the evidence. So I've appreciated what you and what Sam and everybody.
Thank you. I mean, it means a lot. We know that there's an industry, a cottage industry, for folks to just push out their expertise, even though they're like, want to be comedians. So I'll stay in my lane. You want to talk about cutting field? I'm there. I'm your person, but I'm not going to get into, the hard stuff. So is there like a point, where, in public health with vaccines, there's just a certain percentage of folks who, unless it's mandated by their employer or the government, they're going to resist after 2 years of trying to convince folks to get the vaccine, or 1 year and a half at least, they're just not going to. It's just not going to happen. But then brushed up against actually having COVID. Is that what we're looking at? Like, maybe there's just a percentage of the population that's, is not vaccinated, hasn't had COVID yet, will probably have COVID, but the percentage that's left that will have COVID, it'll be less than the Omicron, and it won't have the same side effects.
Yeah, I mean, are you basically asking, do you think we're going to get to herd immunity?
No, not herd immunity. I mean, because of vaccines, right? I'm just questioning why the government's thinking this way, because I mean, there are obviously some people that are resistant and will literally draw this pandemic out till the end of time for their own reasons, but right. They're bound to get COVID, or many times get COVID, and many will probably be some will be hospitalized, who knows how many. But after a while, I guess herd immunity in that little community, but not herd immunity for all of us. It's just, we're now, for those of us who are vaccinated and boosted and we'll have our 4th boost or whatever it is, it just won't have the same effect if we do get COVID again. And especially if there's fewer people in that community spreading it.
Yeah. I mean, the reason for mandates is not just, you got the people who are just sort of anti-vax. There's a traditional anti-vax community, which is loud and proud. They've always been against vaccines. And then there's a sort of new group that they're fully vaccinated with every other traditional vaccine schedule, but they just have different types of resistance to this one, largely based on a lot of fear mongering and misinformation that's been pushed out by various people with various motives. And then you have people that just like, they don't pay much attention. They don't really watch news. They don't really follow what's going on. They live their lives and they don't really care that much. And they just don't bother. And that's where mandates really are effective, because they have to. And it's not that they have any real ideology. They're just like, oh, I have to do it. I'm gonna lose my job. Okay. And then they go do it, and it's no big deal. And so you can really kind of ramp up a lot of numbers in that. And then the sort of semi-resistant population, when it's just, well, I don't want to get it, but I also don't want to lose my job. And yeah, I'm going to go get the mandate. And you get enough of those numbers there where they do work. I mean, same thing with mask mandates. And of course, there's going to be people who get various types of exemptions. And there's always, like, you're always going to have a portion of people that just aren't going to get it. And when you have a highly efficacious vaccine, you can still reach herd immunity, even if there's kind of a sliver of the population that's not going to get vaccinated. The biggest problem that we have is not the anti or the non-vaccine or the vaccine hesitant people in high income countries. It's the fact that we had a shot to do this with global equity.
Right.
We give to neoliberalism. We let market forces determine to whom vaccines went and where and how. And where we got variants that came from India and now the African continent, where vaccine uptake and allocation was not at all equitable. And as you know, the more chances you give it to transmit, the more chances you give it to mutate. And ultimately, the probability is you're going to get some mutations that have some vaccine evasion. And now had it not been for Delta, it's very possible we could have, between the people with prior immunity from infection and vaccination, we could have approached it, even if, 15% of adults, above age 18 weren't getting it. But now we have continued transmission despite vaccination, even with boosting. And again, that BA1 variant that's right now kind of downtrending, that's likely from the African continent. And now we already have the BA2, the so-called stealth Omicron, that we're anticipating is going to start ramping up in the next couple of months, which is, I think, something like 33% more contagious. And
than Omicron?
Yes.
And Omicron was already
exactly.
So much more.
And,
wow.
Most experts in immunology do not actually think that this current variant is going to provide much long-term durable immunity against future variants. So people are saying, oh, this is just going to be nature's booster. It's a mild illness we're all going to get. Unlikely. Number one, it's not less virulent than the original strain. It's less virulent than Delta, but not necessarily much less virulent than the original strain, number one. And number two, because it's primarily replicating in the upper airways and not going down into the lower lung fields as much, unlikely to induce as much long-term immunity. And so if you talk to a lot of experts in immunology and molecular biology, they're actually saying that we are still likely going to be susceptible to additional strains. And so what does encourage me, I don't want to be doom and gloom. I'm encouraged by the fact that Corbavax is moving forward in India, and then hopefully in Africa and other parts of the world, lower middle income countries, which Baylor Children's with Dr. Hotez and his colleagues got out there, no strings attached, no patent, releasing no money.
Wow.
No profits, no nothing, and it's a highly effective recombinant vaccine that, unlike with our current mRNA and adenovirus vector-based vaccines, that it's all about protecting the profits and the patents, and that's resulted in limited allocation. I think between Corbavax and some of the they're developing new vaccines are mRNA based against the newer strains. And hopefully, as we get younger and younger people immunized, hopefully we'll get there. I'm actually not as pessimistic as some of my colleagues are, but I also think a lot of people are painting a rosy picture compared to what we are likely going to see going forward. I'm somewhere in the middle.
In terms of vaccine equity right now, I haven't seen the stats recently, but are things improving in the countries around the world, India, the African continent, parts of South Asia that have not been able to receive the vaccine. And also, like, how much of this is, I've read a few reports about how it's not necessarily because they can't receive the vaccine, they're not getting it in some countries, it's that they're not able to store it because of refrigerating and refrigerating in terms of transporting as well.
Yep, that's a big part of it. Yeah, that's certainly a big part of it. That's going to be one of the good things about this new vaccine. And then also Novavax is another new one that just finally applied for emergency use authorization in the U.S. And I think it's put in applications in a couple of other countries. And that's going to be a nanoparticle-based vaccine. And that one also does not require the ultra-cold storage. And so I'm hoping that these are going to, hopefully the expansion of some of the new antivirals. We do have monoclonals that are, some of the older ones were not working well, Regeneron and some of the prior ones. Now we do have effective monoclonals. And then another big one likely is going to be fluvoxamine, which Dr. David Boulware and colleagues actually applied on behalf of that generic drug for emergency use authorization from the FDA. Unfortunately, they seem to be slow walking, but that's the one repurposed old generic drug that has actually held up to high quality clinical trials, both phase 2 and phase 3, published in JAMA and Lancet, respectively, that did statistically significantly reduce the composite endpoint of prolonged emergency room visit, hospitalization, and death. And in the per protocol, meaning the people who took at least 80% of it in the trial, there was actually a 91% reduction in death found in that group. You have to be a little careful with the protocol analysis because it introduces non-random effects. I don't want to get too technical here, but that drug has held up very, very well to high quality studies versus other drugs that we've seen come and go that people myself included, got excited about that didn't end up holding up well to the highest quality trials. It looks like fluvoxamine is probably the real deal. Not everyone tolerates that drug though, and it's because there is no company that's going to take responsibility to be responsible for the manufacturing of it. It's hard. The FDA, frankly, doesn't really know what to do with this EUA application. But if they can get their stuff together, that's something that could be equitable, easily distributable, very, very low cost. A number of highly reputable centers, Johns Hopkins and others, have included it in their outpatient treatment recommendations. But the Infectious Disease Society of America and NIH still are calling it recommend against outside of a clinical trial. Actually, NIH finally upgraded it to can't recommend for or against it. So just kind of leaving it to doctors' decisions. We'll likely see an update on that one after some additional studies come in. But I'm encouraged about that. A couple of the other newer antivirals that are out, newer vaccines, and particularly this recombinant one. I think we're going to have better treatment protocols. I think we're going to have more immunity, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of tamp this thing down. The question is going to be, are any of these things going to result in less long COVID?
Right. And so perfect transition. I'm going to start out just a personal story. My best friend, she lives in Switzerland. She's American. She grew up in Arizona. And in January of 2021, so right when the vaccine was just starting to be dispersed, maybe not even so, I think it hadn't really circulated even for her mom's age group. Her mom got COVID. And very soon, almost immediately, it triggered this sort of not brain fog, but like Alzheimer's. Like she immediately started having, she was having like memory attacks where she didn't remember where she was, very aggressive, like not early, but late Alzheimer's in a woman who was in her, early 60s. Now my best friend, she's been going back and forth trying to solve this issue, deal with it. But because it was so early, they knew it was a long haul COVID, but they didn't understand what was happening, and she couldn't find the experts for it. And they're still struggling with this, how to treat it and what it was about COVID that basically kicked off her what, if it's Alzheimer's or not, the issue that she's facing. Is this, or I guess first off, is that common? Like how many different effects of COVID in long are you seeing? Are there different ailments that are being that it's causing, obviously with lungs, but also brain fog, whatever? Are there things that are dormant that are being kind of unleashed because of COVID, maybe the stress of COVID?
That's part of it. So there's that old proverb about different religions are basically like a blind person and an elephant, different parts of the elephant, and depending on which one of them you talk to, that's what the elephant is. That's really what long COVID is right now in terms of the experts, because there are different research groups who are really attacking this in terms of the research that they're putting forward as far as the cause or etiology of this syndrome. And so the big ones, they break down into a few categories. There's certainly what's called auto-antibody production that's happening. That's been found to be a major risk factor in people who get infected, where they get infected and they end up with auto-antibodies, meaning your immune system is attacking itself and forming an antibody against some part of your own, physiology. So that's something that you'll see in a lot of autoimmune conditions, like for example, lupus. You make autoantibodies against double-stranded DNA. So there are autoantibodies, and that's being looked at. There is also the possibility that it is sort of exacerbating or flaring up or activating old dormant pathogens. Like, so for example, people who have had prior Epstein-Barr virus, so mononucleosis, that was shown to be a big. So,
and what is that? What is Epstein-Barr?
Epstein-Barr virus is married to the Ghislaine-Maxwell virus. No, I'm just kidding. It's basically the pathogen that causes mono. But it can be associated with Burkitt's lymphoma, and sometimes people get it and they'll basically carry, antibodies that for a long time. But it's possible that is laid dormant and then could potentially be reactivated by COVID-19. The group that I'm working for, so Dr. Patterson's been doing a lot of work looking at immune cells called non-classical monocytes, and they actually found that up to 15 months after recovering from infection, this little piece of the viral spike protein is sticking around in these immune cells, which basically course through your circulation and cause irritation of the vasculature, what we call vasculitis, irritation of the inner lining of blood vessels that triggers all kinds of different immune responses, inflammatory responses. And so further research is basically targeted at whether that could be a potential target of treatment. And so we're basically trying to get a clinical trial off the ground to try to determine whether there are medications that can actually undo that. So we have a major Southwest University, a major academic center that's working with us. That's ready to be our trial site. We're basically just working on getting the funding to start that randomized controlled trial. I actually designed the trial, but we can't get around until we get funding. So we're working on that. And then there are other doctors that are looking at clotting. And so basically, the presence of this viral spike protein has caused excessive clotting and coagulation, and so people are having clots in the microvasculature, meaning small blood vessels, and so people are not getting good blood flow to different organs. There are studies that have shown that there is decreased brain activity. So when you do an MRI of someone's brain, which is a structural study, you'll find that for the most part, the brains look normal, but they're doing what are called PET scans, where you actually look at the uptake of fluoridated glucose and you actually look at the metabolic activity, and they're finding significantly lowered metabolic activity in the brains. There was a recent study where they found that one of the major, what we call cranial nerve, one of the longest nerve in the body called the vagus nerve, very important to numerous bodily functions, is significantly dysfunctional in post-COVID patients. So what's tying this all together? Is there one underlying thing that's sort of triggering the rest of these? Are these just different ways that this can manifest? I mean, we don't know. And so the research is going to chip away. Right now, there's really the treatment protocols that are being used are, a lot of the major academic centers, Mayo Clinic and Yale and, other places. They're basically using multimodal strategies, multidisciplinary. Patients are being sent to different specialists, getting batteries of tests and doing different types of physiotherapy and psychotherapy, behavioral treatment, certain medications. And, slowly but surely, we're sort of inching toward hopefully some solutions to help people recover. Some of the research coming out so far is in terms of duration. It's defined as having symptoms ongoing 4 weeks after you recover from infection. Wow. But they found that close to 90% of people still had ongoing symptoms 35 weeks in.
And is this just with folks who get COVID when they're not vaccinated?
All right, good question. the likelihood of long COVID from the best research that we have available to date, let me stress that again, based on the best research we have available to date, these things can change.
Right.
But the likelihood of ending up with long COVID drops significantly in vaccinated folks compared to unvaccinated.
Fully vaccinated folks, you mean?
Yeah, the unvaccinated, the likelihood can be anywhere between 30 some odd percent to sometimes even higher.
Wow.
And from the best data we have, that drops to something like 18 or 19% among the fully vaccinated.
Okay.
So we do have people who get breakthrough infections and end up with post-acute sequelae. But as far as we can tell, it tends to be less durable, resolves more quickly, happens less often, and seems to be less refractory to treatment compared to if you get this thing and you're not vaccinated. Because the four biggest risk factors that were found in that study that was published were the viral load. So the more viral load that you end up in your body is the more viral material. It makes sense. You're going to be more likely to end up, well, you end up with higher amounts of virus in your body if you don't have antibodies and memory cells to fight them. So that's one. Then the other was the presence of Epstein-Barr. The other one was the autoantibodies. And then the final one was diabetes. I'll tell you, I've been working with COVID long haulers since around July or August. I see anywhere between 50 to 100 of them a month. And I would say the majority of people I see were previously healthy. Young people who didn't have any chronic medical conditions. In fact, when I asked them, do you have any past medical history before you got COVID? It's never just a one-word answer. It's like, no, I was active. I was running half marathons. I was rock climbing. I was windsurfing. I was golfing. I was playing basketball. And now I can barely get up a flight of stairs. Or my brain fog is so bad, I had to leave my job because I can't perform the mental functions required to allow me to work that job. Or, I can maybe go walk a mile, but then I'm completely winded and I'm done for a couple of days. And so, when people use just hospitalization and death to guide policy or to make this seem like it's no big deal, I've had numerous long haulers tell me that they wish COVID killed them.
Whoa. And that's insane. Is long haul COVID when you've had a bad COVID case? Like, there are plenty of people who didn't even realize they had COVID, early on in the pandemic or otherwise, that, before they were vaccinated, that just didn't have the same effect. Do they have long haul as much? What's the statistic like?
So yeah, it's something like among people that end up hospitalized, it's something like 70% will still have symptoms.
Whoa.
In that 4-week period. In the people who got mild illness or were outpatients, it's something more like 30%.
Okay.
But now you're dealing with potentially distinct entities. You gotta realize when you use this sort of blanket definition of anybody that still continues to have symptoms after X amount of time, that could be because you have lung fibrosis because you got COVID pneumonia. That could be because you were in the ICU and now you have, you ended up with critical care delirium or post-critical care polyneuropathy, which can happen in any critical illness, not just COVID. It could be because you had a blood clot. It could, versus the real immunological phenomenon of long COVID and potential pathogen persistence and autoantibodies. That's kind of a different phenomenon. And so you kind of, when you use the blanket term of just like long COVID, it's potentially a very heterogeneous group of people. And so, there's a lot. And so you have people out there and they're just taking bucket loads of supplements and they're going on their internet, and doctors in some cases are saying, oh, take this and this will work, or here's this treatment protocol and this will clear it up. We have no idea if any of these things work, and we won't know until we have high quality randomized trials. And that's going to take a long time. So right now, treatment centers are just doing their best to try to use the information that we have at hand and very carefully and with informed consent and proper explanation of uncertainties, trying different types of multimodal treatment to try to get people better. In some cases, you'll have people tell you, yeah, hey, I tried this, I tried that, I got better. But without a control group, you don't know what that person's natural history was. Maybe that's somebody that would have got better anyway. You don't really know. That's why you really need proper controlled trials before you can make any kind of conclusive statements about what works or what doesn't work.
Okay, I just have a couple questions before, but I'm sorry we're going a little bit long. I'm being just that person who's reading things online and has to ask the doctor. So please forgive me for being such a dummy. I read a piece recently that for women, who've taken the vaccination, although there's not enough, as you said, data, this is what I read in the piece, that they're having more extreme menstrual cycles. Is there any, have you heard of anything about this in terms of research?
I've heard reports when you're comparing it to control groups in well-designed studies, we're not seeing huge differences, but it's going to take time to really tease that out.
Okay.
I want to be a little careful because I'm not probably up to date on the best literature on that one particular finding.
Yeah, I just saw the paper and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'll look at that again.
Because I don't have to tell you, like, there's obviously gender reproductive research is not always shared or invested in.
No, absolutely, and when you bring up reproductive, because reproductive deficiencies or reproductive abnormalities are we're seeing it long COVID. So people, erectile dysfunction, things like that are happening in a lot of males.
Tell Nicki Minaj it wasn't the vaccine; it was getting it.
Well, yeah, probably. That sounded more like an STI. Anyway,
yeah.
So that we're definitely seeing that, and as far as it's amazing the symptoms. It's just any symptom you could think of, everything from hair loss, alopecia, to skin problems, to digestive upset, chest pain, shortness of breath, brain fog, not tolerating foods that a person used to tolerate, muscle aches, dizziness, POTS syndrome, where people they stand up and their heart rate goes through the roof.
Wow.
Just such an incredible array of all different sorts of symptoms that we're seeing in these people. And it's, as I said, it's going to take a lot of time before we tease out the exact, pathophysiology, and then ultimately find things that we can potentially target for treatment and hopefully be able to, restore quality of life to people that are debilitated. I've seen a few people that have come out of it and are back to their lives. Those success stories are always heartwarming, but in other cases, people really continue to have absolutely debilitating symptoms. I have people in their early 30s who are now wheelchair bound. I've got people who are so fatigable. This is one I've seen a few patients. They're so fatigable that just exerting their full voice knocks them out, so they have to whisper. They can't even use their voice, let alone get up and move. And I'm not trying to fear monger. I mean, this is something, that degree of debilitation is pretty rare, but the array of symptoms and the percentage of people that are experiencing some degree of symptoms long after they recover, I think we have to be aware of the fact that if we don't properly mitigate this, even if we don't have as many hospitalizations, we might not be looking at the kind of mass casualty event we saw during the first wave, but a mass disabling event would actually be pretty bad too. And while we may not be crowding emergency rooms at hospitals anymore, are we going to be crowding and overrunning subspecialty clinics and ambulatory care centers and multidisciplinary practices and imaging and, all these things that people have to get done when they have these otherwise unexplained chronic illnesses, and especially in a country that doesn't have universal health care and people are having to shell out money out of their own pockets to get all these things done. There's going to be a looming crisis if we don't properly mitigate this. And in order to do that, we have to acknowledge it and consider it in our policies, not just think about hospitalization and death.
Not to mention the folks who weren't financially prepared for being in the hospital if they were there receiving care. A friend of mine's brother, he somehow got into one of these echo chambers about the vaccine, and it wasn't necessarily politically driven. You just didn't think that he was in, the group of people that was going to be affected by COVID. Next thing you know, over the holidays and into the new year, he was his late 30s, hooked up to, the machines and was on his deathbed, and he survived, thank God. But now he's completely out of money, bankrupt with kids. Add long haul to that, if you have to continue, we already had a medical debt crisis, as you know too well. It's going to be very, very, very serious, I think. And we're just, starting to process it, and government's obviously going to have to do something. Dr. Osgood, I have so many more questions. Maybe what we can do is have you on again soon, and we can ask our listeners to throw in their questions. And we send them to you in advance, so you're not like completely thrown off if needed. And we'd love to have you back on for another round if you're down.
Definitely. I'm happy to talk to you anytime.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Osgood. Keep up the amazing work involving long haul COVID. To everybody else, make sure to check us out at TNS Live on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. We start off on the platforms, and then we move to rockfin.com/nomiki, where we have extensive interviews with some of our favorite people. Make sure to check it out and go subscribe over there at Rockfin on Tuesday night for our live conversation, 8 p.m. Eastern. And of course, go check us out on all the podcasts, on wherever you find your podcast. Go find us there. And take care and stay in solidarity.
The NaoBun Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The NaoBun Show.